Welcome everyone to Africam4Good, brought to you by explore.org. And thank you for joining us today, where we'll be having a discussion with Kyle-Mark Middleton from Associated Private Nature Reserves about the wonderful ground hornbill. My name is Russell Gerber, and of course, will be your host for today. We'll be having this fun discussion about one of the most interesting bird species that we find down here in Africa. Hi, Kyle.
Hi there, Russell. How are you?
Very well, thanks. It's lovely to have you with us today, mate. Why don't you kick us off, as we always do, just telling us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you guys do over there.
Oh, thanks for the introduction. As everyone has already been told, my name is Kyle, and I'm one of the researchers at the Ground Hornbill project here in Limpopo in South Africa. So what we do is largely research and conservation-based work on the Southern Ground Hornbill species. We work in an area around the Kruger National Park, for those of you who don't know where that is. Pretty much a lot of where the videos that Africam already have. We work in these reserves, and we do all that we can to try and understand the species a bit better, as well as to conserve them and help them persevere through the troubling times ahead. That's pretty much the gist of it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, as I said, I think, you're talking about one of the species that a lot of our viewers out there, really get excited about when they come on the camera. I can even remember when I first started going on safari in Kruger, seeing ground hornbill. They're such weird looking birds. It just doesn't seem like, they almost belong in those environments. And yet, as you are well aware, they are just such incredibly interesting animals to watch, and so important for the environment. But, even though they're pretty interesting, what made you decide to get into the conservation and specifically conservation of ground hornbills?
I have to agree with you. They're very charismatic species, and you can't drive past them without stopping and wondering what's going on about there. As for me, I mean, I was kind of just, I suppose it kind of just happened upon it. I've always been into nature, and conservation has always been the key for me. Always been wanting to do it and things, and ground hornbills kind of just, I don't want to say fell into my lap, but it kind of, I happened upon it rather. I used to live in one of the reserves that we work in now, and I knew about the project and supported them, loved their work they did, and we just heard that they were looking for new people to come in and join this project, and I applied, and kind of, yeah, now it's almost 6 years down the line, and I'm just still happily cracking on with all the work that we're doing on the species.
Cool, man. Well, yeah, a lot of people fall into various research fields. Yeah. I know many colleagues out there that tends to, be how it goes. For me, on a much smaller level, just at varsity in postgrad, I ended up working with carnivorous macro zooplankton, which was never something I thought would be anything that would be interesting, but that is the way that life goes, So really cool, though, that it ended up being ground hornbills for you. Tell us about the Associated Private Nature Reserves, though, and the Ground Hornbill project specifically. What do you and the team do?
So the Associated Private Nature Reserves, or APNR otherwise as it's known, is just a collection of privately owned reserves on the outskirts of Kruger National Park. So it's open to Kruger, but it's not open to tourism. It does have tourism, but it's private tourism. And this project that I'm working on now has actually been going for about, I think we're on our 21st year of working on the species. In the early days, it was noticed, we didn't really know much about the species, and the first researchers that came in thought, they started having a look at these birds, and they started noticing that there's a lack of nesting sites kind of thing. We don't know much about them. So they started putting up nesting sites and noticed that these birds are taking to these nests. So it kind of just snowballed from there. The nests kind of facilitated research, and everything just kind of moved forward. And yeah, we're 20 years down the line, tons of research that's gone on, and yeah, no sign of stopping anytime soon.
Well, that's good. I mean, any project that goes on for that long, certainly, gives a sense of some success. But I mean, for you guys, when you're out there in the field, what does, your field research, what does it entail?
So the territories of these birds, I mean, for those of you, the viewers that have not seen a ground hornbill, it's these extremely large, birds, and a lot of people don't know, but their territories are massive. They're about 100 square kilometers. So with group sizes on average between 3 and 4 birds within 100 square kilometer radius, it's a big area pretty much per group. So a lot of what we do is we put these nests up, and then we'll drive from nest to nest and just monitor their breeding and see if things are going according to plan, if it's a good season, if it's a bad season. If a group needs a nest, we'll go and install a nest. We'll do all sorts of various studies on vocalizations and social structures. There's new research coming in now looking at new nest designs to better facilitate breeding. We're looking at how climate change might affect them. So it's really got this, there's a whole bunch of different things to do, but it mostly involves us. Most of the research is based around the nesting site. So we drive pretty much from nesting site to nesting site and just try and monitor the breeding to ensure that they are, succeeding. And then when they do breed, so the group will lay 2 eggs. So there's only 1 female within each group, and they'll lay 2 eggs. And the second hatched chick out of those 2 will die almost 100% of the time in the wild. So before that second hatched chick dies, we'll actually go in and we will take it out of the nest. And then it gets sent to another project, which we work closely with, the Mabula Ground Hornbill project. And then they'll actually rear the chicks and then release them back into the wild in their historic range. So it's kind of just trying to double their success rate through each breeding attempt. Yeah. And it's been hugely successful, and we're seeing great progress.
Awesome. I mean, that's, as you said, there's a lot of challenges involved there. One of the things that I was wondering about that we could help maybe clarify for some of our viewers, you say that the birds, take quite happily to these man-made nesting sites, but what does a normal, a wild nesting site look like? Where do they generally nest? How does it normally go? And why aren't they building their own?
So the natural nesting sites, I mean, they do occur, but they, at least within the area we work in, they're very few and far between. The natural nesting sites, they're pretty much just cavities in trees. So holes in trees, much like a lot of other bird species nest in. But with them being such large birds, they need extremely large cavities. And although the name of ground hornbill suggests that they spend all the time on the ground, they're actually very adept flyers. So they nest in cavities in trees at least 4 meters off the ground. So you picture this bird of that size needing a cavity big enough for it, at least 4 meters off the ground. These nesting sites, or these trees rather, have to be massive pretty much to house these cavities. So with land use change and people pushing over trees and things like that, the nesting sites kind of just diminished in the past 100 years, and that's why we're kind of not seeing these natural nesting sites occurring like they used to.
Okay, interesting, awesome. You've got a lot of challenges that you're facing, of course, in getting the research together. Just you mentioned how big the territories are is one thing, but what are some of the other challenges that you found in ground hornbill conservation? What are the things that are most pressing for you guys?
I would say it usually with conservation, or at least this conservation work, it often revolves around people and people's misconceptions, their beliefs, and all this stuff. It's trying to work with people. They're such large birds, and like often with these large birds, they see themselves in the reflection of windows and things, so they'll actually go and peck at it like a lot of other birds do. But with these birds being so big, one peck is a broken window, and it might be interesting and novel at the time, but when they're pecking out 80 windows of a school every week, it becomes a bit of an issue, and people, you know, they start to get persecuted a bit. So it usually revolves around people and land use change. They don't respond very well to changes in land use. Another thing we struggle with is that within protected areas within South Africa, so in Kruger National Park, for example, we know that these birds are, you know, people see them regularly. And one of the main questions we always get is, well, you know, we always see them in Kruger, so they can't be endangered, kind of thing. But, you know, even though they are quite abundant in Kruger and even in our study site, kind of, you know, they outside of these protected areas, the numbers are really dwindling, and it's, I mean, the populations are rapidly declining. I think it's one of the fastest declining species in the country outside of a protected area. So it's just dealing with these misconceptions pretty much around the species, and trying to, you know, just guide people and try and, yeah, give people a better understanding of what the actual situation is.
Yeah, I think I can see what you mean. I mean, that a big black bird on the ground with, you know, this bright red, you know, almost shining through the bush, as you say, they're pretty conspicuous. So
yeah,
spotting them, you know, unlike spotting, let's say, a Corey bustard or, you know, another big ground bird species, much more camouflaged. It does sometimes feel like you see them pretty often, and I can understand how that would be a misconception, you know, that people may not really realize. What is another thing that you've learned about ground hornbills that you think people may not know?
It's quite a spectrum of a question, because if we can start at the more like simple side of things.
Well, what's the most shocking one? You know, let's go with the most shocking bit of information about the Southern ground hornbill.
I'll give you a few, and then you can decide for yourself if that works a bit better. Let's start with, there's only one female per group, so it's a female-dominated group. She's the boss. They don't drink any water,
which is interesting for birds. Yeah, that's quite an interesting thing. Yeah,
they don't drink any water. They extremely long-lived, so in the wild they'll live between 50 and 60 years old. So I mean, a lot of the birds, even though our project, for example, has been going for 20 years now, we've probably been working on the same birds for the past 20 years. And then if we go into the more complex side of things, a lot of my research is looking into the vocalizations. What we found is that, you know, these birds produce these deep booming vocalizations as a means to advertise and defend their territories. But what we found is that each group has its own signature call. So it's unique. Each female will produce a call that's unique to that female. So they can actually recognize each other over, you know, 3-4 kilometer distances. So it's just these signatures that we found in their calls, and we can actually identify them from a remote distance as well. So yeah, just a few interesting facts you can
that's cool
for yourself.
That's cool. I'm going to steal that for the show. If we see them next time I'm definitely going to put out that little fact about signature calls. That's really interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. Cool, man. Diving into a little bit more into your guys' research. You guys build the artificial nests, as we spoke about, and you monitor them. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and potentially what amazing things you've seen whilst monitoring the birds?
Yeah, so the nests are an ongoing project of ours. So we work with as I mentioned, the Mabula Ground Hornbill project. And in the old days, we just used to carve nests out of wooden structures and things, but it became a bit tiresome and things. So now we work with the Mabula Ground Hornbill project, where these nests are actually engineered these days. So they get made by engineering students, and they make them specifically in ways that, you know, so they have this thermal insulation kind of thing. Because in our study site here, it gets extremely hot. I mean, in summers, you know, it's often over 40 degrees Celsius kind of thing. So we're trying to look at how temperatures are affecting their breeding, and can we mitigate the harsh conditions by creating nests that are better for these birds, but by creating better conditions with, or microclimates within these nests, so that the birds can breed a bit more successfully. So we've kind of been doing this for a few years now, and when we put a nest up, the birds usually take to them quite quickly. Well, I say quickly, it can take between 3 weeks to 3 years kind of thing, and nothing often happens. The time scale with ground hornbills is often very different. It's not, when I say quick, it's not 2 minutes. But then, so we'll put these cameras up, and then we go and we put trail cameras up at facing the nesting site, so that we can actually monitor the breeding. Their breeding is extremely long. It's about 130 days long, so it's impossible for us to go and sit at the nest and observe them for 130 days. So these trail cameras, you know, they've been a game changer, and we really get to see the private lives of these birds. We get to, you know, see the odd communications that they are doing between individuals. We get to see, you know, what food is being brought to the chicks. We get to see predation events. It's sad, but we have footage of, you know, a leopard coming and actually climbing inside the nest and sitting inside the nest, and it's sad, but it's also, it's, you know, it's nature, and it's something that we can collect data on now, thanks to these camera traps. But yeah, there's so much to say about the camera stuff, and so much that we can get from it. It's really been invaluable to the project.
Yeah, that's cool. Look, I mean, we've noticed that even just with the, you know, the Africam cameras at various waterholes, you know, with all sorts of species that we come across, the amount of interesting behaviors we've seen, as you say, just having something that's there 24/7, that you can go back and look at, is, yeah, you get some really incredible information. And I'm sure that's the same with the, you know, with the cameras on the nests.
Absolutely. And these videos, it's because we use videos as well, and it just opens up a world of things that we can investigate. You know, if we don't have answers to something, we can go back and look at it, rather than going into the field and searching for them and then watching them there. We can just view the cameras, and it really answers a lot of questions.
Yeah. Now, you guys also monitor the ground hornbills in Baluli, where of course we have a number of cameras. And some of the hornbills we see on our live cams, do they ever help you with some of your research?
Absolutely. I mean, we do work. Baluli is part of our study site. We haven't gone there. I mean, it's probably been less frequent in those reserves, because there's a less of a density of the birds. We're trying to get natural dispersals to move into that area, and we are seeing it happen. And we have been getting some sightings from the Africam footage, and it's been hugely helpful to us. It really has. We can see, it helps us to just get an idea of, you know, what birds are there numbers wise. If, for example, a group comes down to one of the waterholes, we can then see the numbers of birds and the composition of the group. So often what we look for is that if we see a group, or someone sends us footage or something like that, and we see that there's a juvenile within the group, it's pretty clear evidence that they've got a natural nesting site. So it helps us to then judge, you know, do they need a nest? Can we provide them with a nest? And it kind of just snowballs from there.
That's also really interesting. What I think a lot of people would want to know, though, is, I mean, can you recognize certain groups? Obviously, a group might give you some clues, but you know, are there ways to recognize them? And do you ever name individuals, things like that?
The recognizing individuals is difficult, but it is doable, and it's one of the things we're currently looking at.
Okay.
So we've got all our camera trap footage, obviously, that we're trying to look into, and we have actually identified. We've got our individual database that we have, where we've ID'd individuals and, you know, written down those characteristics and things. It's extremely difficult though, and you need close-ups on the sides of their faces. They've got distinct shapes of, we call them sideburns, where you can kind of, it's different between the individuals. As for naming the birds, in a sense, I suppose we name them. We give them codes, pretty much. So it's a code. Each group will have a code, and then it's a number to each individual within the group. We try to avoid naming them just from a research standpoint to prevent any bias going around anthropomorphizing anything along those lines, prevent us from getting attached to the birds kind of thing. So we can come from this unbiased point of view when we're trying to figure something out.
Yeah, that's always a difficult thing to do. Even when I started working as a safari guide, that was something we were taught as well, that we try not to name them. And if we do, it's not so much a personal name. It would be like where they're from and things like that, or where they were born. And yeah, it's not always easy to explain to people, to try to keep a little bit of separation. And as you say, to try to reduce anthropomorphizing them as much as you can, because you get attached to the animals. Of course you do.
You definitely do. And you don't want to, put emotion to it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I must admit, we've got one bird. We've got one bird that we've named, and that's it. But it's one female.
There's always one.
There's always one. Yeah.
There's always one. Yeah, we did too. Like you say, it always happens. We had an amazing leopard when I first started guiding, who was, the spot pattern was 3-3. But we dubbed him, or not me, but long before me, one of the trackers actually dubbed him Tyson, because he was missing part of his ear. If you recall, of that fight years ago with Mike Tyson bits, I think it was Evander Holyfield's ear. But anyway, as you say, there's always one that is a specific character that you tend to name.
Yeah.
Let's get back to our hornbills though, and people can send in sightings of ground hornbills on your website. I know that you guys can actually do that. Can our viewers actually send in live camera sightings to the site as well?
Please do. Please do. It's the live camera footage is really it goes, even any sightings, pictures and things. I can't explain how much we can use it, kind of thing. It's really, really, really valuable to us to get any kind of sighting. It helps us, as I mentioned, it helps us just to kind of piece together where different groups are and stuff like that. So we can kind of pinpoint, here's a group. We keep seeing these birds here. Okay, what's going on around them, etc., etc. But please, yes, it's hugely, hugely useful. Any data that we can get from the footage from the Africam videos, it helps with some of our current research on climate change. Just trying to see, what temperatures these birds are kind of thermoregulating. Are they feeding when it's, in the heat of the day? It's kind of just helps us to plan for the future.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm sure many of our viewers out there will be keen to get involved. Is there any other way that they can get involved, to help out with the Southern Ground Hornbill conservation?
Sightings is probably the main one. Obviously sightings, awareness is also a good one. So if someone hasn't heard of a ground hornbill and they've watched this or seen them on the videos, hopefully they can just share a little bit of information about them, get them out there. They're not globally known as what we like to call them, and they're not the sexy species kind of thing that are well known throughout the world. But any kind of awareness really goes a long way, and then at the end of the day, funding is always the big one. But that depends on who's willing and what they're willing to contribute. But if anyone's willing to contribute any funding, I mean, the list of requirements is endless. But yeah,
sure.
Otherwise, it's just the sighting goes a long way.
Man, I really, really enjoyed chatting to you, and all the best with your work up there with the hornbills, and we'll be keeping an eye out for them on the cameras. That's for sure.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks for having me. It was good to chat.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, man. And I'll think of you guys every time I see a ground hornbill, and now I can use some cool new facts in my hosting of various shows and guests in the bush. Always good to have new info. So thanks very much again, Kyle.
You're welcome.
And thank you to all of you once again for watching the show. Please join us again next week for Africam4Good, brought to you by explore.org. Don't forget to subscribe to become a part of the Explore community. But from all of us here at Africam, It's cheers for now.